So, started as a physics math major. Actually was interested in quantum mechanics. One of the people I met very early in my life who became a model of somebody I wanted to become was this guy, Richard Feynman. He's a Nobel Prize physicist. He actually had the misfortune of being involved in the making of the bomb. And that had a real big impact on him in his life. And when the bomb went off, he describes a story of wandering around near Alamo, which is in the middle of the desert, thinking, well, that's it, we're done, life is over, because we've let the genie out of the bottle. People are going to use this horrible weapon and decimate this planet. So he really became a pacifist and anti-war person, following the creation of the bomb, much like Oppenheimer did. I met him when I was at Cal Berkeley, and I really wanted to go to Caltech, but I couldn't afford to go to Caltech because Caltech's annual tuition was $1,999. You think, well, $2,000 seems a big deal, but tuition at Cal Berkeley was only $200 a quarter, or $600 a year, less than half. So for me at that time, I had really no choice. I actually had to work my way through school because my parents ran into financial trouble. And so I ended up in this other route where I was doing this double major, and I actually was into marine biology of all things, and genetic engineering. I did dabbled in that as well. And I ended up applying to graduate school and got this position at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst as a marine biologist in the middle of a state not near an ocean. And I had gotten married, moved out there, and started working. And then I got sucked into other things. It seems like, and it's the Forrest Gump phenomena. You end up doing other things that just sort of drop in your lap. The two things that happened while I was there is I ended up in the Department of Mathematics because they needed a body to do their master's program in statistics. And I ended up working with this guy because I knew how to do genetic stuff. I knew how to transform bacteria, and I knew how to manipulate plasmids. So I ended up in this genetic lab in the Department of Zoology and doing a lot of medical stuff. And saying, I have no clue what we're doing. It's all this medical stuff, and I really don't understand what the premise of any of this stuff is. And a lot of us were like that in the lab. We were all thinking, oh, we're doing all this research work, but we really don't understand what the impact of any of this stuff is. So a lot of us became interested in medical school, and the year that I left, I think there were 4 other people in the graduate division that did the same thing. We all went to medical school, 4 of us. So I ended up in Philadelphia at Hahnemann. And while I was in medical school, I got interested in the physiology part of medicine and naturally gravitated to nephrology, study of kidneys, because it's got the most physiology of practically any area of medicine. And eventually, ended up at the University of Penn, did research again in a lab, working on rats and guinea pigs and doing studies on ion channels. I'm probably one of the few patch clampers around that still knows how to do it in the world. And did that for a couple of years, and then eventually took a job at the University of Medicine Dentistry, and except for a small hiatus in Delaware, have been teaching at one campus of UMD&J or another for the last 20 years. And I've enjoyed doing that part of my job, teaching, which I think is the best part of it. There was a 2-year hiatus that I took when I was diagnosed with liver cancer. Ended up at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center after 8 months on the transplant waiting list. Had a liver transplant, and then did another 9 months of chemotherapy following that. So I was out of work for a good 2 years, and then came back to work in 2008. And during that time, had some very interesting experiences. it's quite an interesting journey when you go through both as a doctor and a patient. And I don't think it made me a different person in the sense that I think I've always been very sympathetic and empathetic towards my patient's plight. And I was fully aware of how the medical issues impacted families and patients. What I got a better sense of, though, being sick, was the financial issues. Here I am, I'm a doctor, I have pretty decent medical insurance. Obviously I'm in a very nice house, and I had disability insurance and other things. Even with that, whole episode really set me back financially, because there are a lot of out-of-pocket expenses not covered under insurance. And total bill that I submitted to on my taxes for 2008, no, maybe it was 2007, was $70,000 of out-of-pocket, unreimbursed medical expenses. Well, imagine if you don't have that type of money and you're sick. I mean, it's no surprise that people go bankrupt when they're confronted with a major illness. And, they'd say that 1 in 4 people is going to have cancer in their lifetime. So, one of your parents, your best friend, your brother or sister, somebody's going to have cancer in your family, and somebody's going to be impacted by this. And it's not just the total financial impact of these things. It's the burden of having to deal with the convoluted system we've created. I mean, you call on the phone constantly with insurance companies, with pharmacies, with prescription plans, and with social security, hours and hours and hours. And if you're sick and you're not able to do that, I don't know how people navigate through this system. It is outrageous. It is a crazy, stupid system that's really, really poorly designed. It's really not a great system. You end up in trouble because it's difficult to manage it even if you have knowledge. If you have no knowledge and you're sick, I don't know how people get through it. So I'm much more sensitive nowadays to the actual cost, the financial burden of these illnesses than I was before. So I do think it's, for example, changed how I prescribe things. I don't prescribe things willy-nilly. I'm very cautious about what I do. And, in the middle of that, I ended up getting divorced. That was, I think, partially my fault. I don't think I realized how sick I was all during that time. It certainly affected my personality. Well, you would know it's better than that, I'm sure I wasn't Mr. Jolly most of the time. I was having memory issues and all sorts of funny, and I was always tired, incredibly tired. So tough times, but I've gotten through that and learned to move on. I am Sansei, meaning 3rd generation. You and Michael are Yonsei, meaning 4th generation. 4th generation is very different. I mean, even the 3rd generation is very different. 3rd generation Japanese Americans very rarely marry among their own culture. Almost all the people I know have married outside of the Japanese race. Part of that is just those are the people you're around. We're not like a lot of other ethnic groups that stay very close together. And I really think the second reason that happened is after World War II, given what happened to Japanese Americans, and they ended up in concentration camps. So we should probably talk about your aunt. We learned to be very independent of each other, and I guess by marrying somebody, particularly a typical white Caucasian American citizen, protects you from that ever happening again, and your children from that happening again, because you say, well, I'm half white. Your Aunt Ray, she's married to Uncle Shig, who did the picture behind me. Her maiden name was Ohara, O-H-A-R-A. And in World War II, she was in the United States when the war broke out. And she ended up in a concentration camp. And I know people like to call them relocation camps, thinking that that makes them nicer. They weren't. She ended up in Hart Mountain in Colorado, where the average temperature during the winter was probably 20 degrees or 10 degrees above zero. They were camps. They were barracks. They were, poorly insulated buildings. That she describes it being freezing cold during the wintertime. She also described to me when the people came to take them to the camp. That first experience was a very scary experience that she didn't fully understand then, but in hindsight it's like, oh, now I understand. They said, we're going to camp, and she thought, oh, we're going camping, So she got all her stuff together, put her bag together, and it's like going to camp. And part of what she brought with her was her Brownie camera. You won't even know that name, but back then, that was a common camera that everybody had. This little box with a little lens and regular film that you wound up. Well, cameras obviously were a no-no. And when the officer arrived to take them to the camp, he stripped her of this camera and confiscated it. And she didn't understand why that was a bad thing. And so that was her very first experience of the part of being relocated. So after they took them to Hart Mountain, she was separated from her father. She stayed with her mother, but father went to a different camp for interrogation for other reasons. And apparently he was never the same after that. His whole personality was different. They ended up then being relocated after the war ended to a place called Seabrook, which is not far from here in New Jersey. It was a farm. The Seabrooks apparently took in a lot of Japanese Americans who had lost their property and were trying to restart their lives again. And she was here for a time and eventually went back to Southern California. She became an English teacher, which was a very interesting career for her, because oftentimes she would apply for the job and talk to people on the phone. She spoke perfect English, no accent, and they often expected an Irish person to be arriving because her name was O'Hara. Well, it's really O'Hara in Japanese, but it's spelled like O'Hara. So lo and behold, they get this Japanese American who speaks perfect English. I have very fond memories of her. She has in her cabinet, in her kitchen, a coffee mug. And she had all these coffee mugs made for all the nieces and nephews and children. Mine is the only survivor of that whole thing. And it's a ceramic little white coffee mug with gingham, outside, and on it is Ricky. And she used to always call me Ricky. So whenever I see her, the first thing I ask is, how's my coffee mug? Because, they have earthquakes in Southern California. Says, it's fine, it's still in the cabinet. So it's sort of a security thing. I know, that things are okay as long as my mug is okay. It's sitting back there in the cabinet in the back. It's my favorite aunt. But anyways, so now I'm still working. I'm an associate professor of medicine at Robert Wood Johnson School of Medicine. At some point or another, it may end up being Cooper Rowan Medical School, and we'll see about that. And been very active with the American College of Physicians. I'm current governor, so that's been an interesting experience that's taken me all around the country. So very fortunate. I can't complain. We've had a very good life despite all the hardships in the middle. Liver cancer, thorax, all those other things. There's minor things, the big picture of things, right? What else would you like to know?